I have long suffered a romantic yearning to discover that the Etruscans, rather than the Romans, were the true descendants of Troy. In researching for this video, I was disabused of this notion. Genetic and archaeological evidence provides no indication of such a history. This leaves me in the same camp as every other linguist, wondering, where the fuck did that language come from? For context, the vast majority of languages found in Iron Age Italy are Indo-European in origin, as is the genetic footprint of most if not all local cultural groups. This latter includes the Rasenna, which is what the Etruscans allegedly called themselves, but the former does not. Their culture developed in the Villanovan period, out of the Proto-Villanovan culture, which itself branched off from the i.e. Urnfield culture around 1200 BC, shortly before they should have been arriving if they were migrants from Troy. They did migrate in, but probably overland, and at a time significantly earlier. The Indo-European cultures that would later become Gallic, Italic, Germanic, and Greek offshoots invaded pre-IE Europe during the Early and Middle Bronze Age, erasing many of the indigenous languages and intermingling with indigenous populations. Very few pre-IE languages remain in Europe, with Basque being, as usual, the notable exception. Ugaritic languages like Finnish also persist around eastern Scandinavia, and one even settled down in modern Hungary. We do know of some lost languages from the area and time period, such as indigenous Iberian languages and the ever-mysterious Minoan language. But these are poorly attested and not well understood. Linguistic fragments persist in some modern languages like the Celtic tongues of Britain and Ireland to suggest that the pre-IE languages spoken there may have been related distantly to the Semitic family. The noteworthy thing about these languages is that they are all pre-Indo-European languages, which, except Basque and the Ugaritic languages, died out and were replaced, the descendants of their speakers growing up instead with IE languages. Mekrasnal, on the other hand, the language of the Rasenna, is a non-IE language spoken by a genetically IE people. What the fuck? Where did that come from? My theory that it was the regal dialect of Troy adopted by a local IE-speaking population just doesn't hold water. To spread a foreign language so wide would require a paradigm shift that we just don't see supported in the evidence. For starters, not only are the Etruscan people considered to have been in the region since before the Trojan War, but their language is also considered to have nothing in common with Anatolian languages. Furthermore, an influx of Trojan refugees would have at the very least left a lasting legacy of Anatolian pottery on the region, which is conspicuously absent. The influence of an anti-Indo-European language on an IE population is not impossible. In fact, it is almost a given in the case of the Rasenna. The question remains, where did it come from? My current theory, since the Trojan one was so mercilessly shot down by the evidence, is that the Etruscan language is intrinsically linked to divination. This is a quality the Romans later attributed to its speakers with gusto, even while snobbishly disapproving of Etruscan customs such as allowing women to drink alcohol and attend parties. The theory is this: the IE cultures flood into Europe and conquer or settle in most of it, with different relations forming based on context. One such contextualization is that they conquer a people who have a highly respected oracular tradition, which continues into the occupation and assimilation, much as the Romans would later do with the Etruscan culture itself. Mekrasnal, or an ancestor of it, would therefore become this society's clerical language, much as Latin is the language of the Catholic Church today. Over time, the clerical language is increasingly adopted by the upper and lower classes, while the genetic footprint of the indigenous population is thoroughly folded into that of the IE population. Through the course of this assimilation, the language changes, but not all the way into an IE language. It borrows words like Isar for the gods, and lends out other words to its neighbors, especially the Latins in the south. Around 1150 BC, the Bronze Age collapses due to incessant pirate attacks and the huge resultant trade and supply problems, but Italy is relatively insulated from the worst effects of this. It's even possible that some Ravenna pirates are among the sea peoples who attack Egypt. Into the Iron Age, there is no reason for contemporaries to suppose that the Etruscans ever came from anywhere other than Italy, although certain Greek writers of the classical era will try to tell you that they are descended from Lydians who fled Anatolia after the Trojan War. Anatolian links have already been discarded due to a lack of linguistic, material, and genetic evidence. Around 750, they reach the height of their extent, not really forming into an empire so much as a loose cultural grouping of city-states. Among other places, they conquer the notoriously insignificant backwater village of Rome, shortly after its mythological foundation by a disgruntled son of Mars who had been at least partially raised by a wolf. Rome first expels its Racenic king, then conquers its former overlords, with the Latin language taking precedence over Etruscan. Mecrasnal, however, has also had its effect on that very Latin language, as Etruscan culture has had its on Roman. The legacy of Etruscan language and custom are still felt today, if subconsciously. Mecrasnal is often erroneously called a language isolate, meaning that it has no known relatives. To the contrary, we know of two other languages in the same family. The Tyrrhenian language family consists of Etruscan, Chaitic, and Lemnian. Some Roman writers said that the Chaitic speakers had been driven out of Etruria by Gauls, but the linguistic break happened too early for that to be the case. Perhaps by their Urnfield or Hallstatt ancestors, but not by Gauls proper. It's also possible that the Proto-Villanovan culture might have been bisected by other Indo-European migrants settling in the Po River Valley after early Etruscan had already been adopted. The positioning of the Lemnian language was a cornerstone of my Trojan ancestry theory, with the thought being that Aeneas and his band of Trojan refugees had stopped over on the island for a while before sailing on to Italy. But the same material, linguistic, and genetic evidence as before still force a reverse engineering of this idea. Far more likely, the island became home to a trading colony of the Ravenna during the early Iron Age, or possibly even Villanovan mercenaries who participated in the Sea People raids of the Bronze Age collapse. We have over 13,000 inscriptions recovered in Mecrasnal, compared to not even 300 in Chaitian and just 2 in Lemnian, basically just enough to know they're connected. We don't understand everything about the Etruscan language. Not very much, even. Most of its texts are short dedications. We have attestations in Roman writing that books were written in the language, but only one of these volumes survives today, and that only because the linen of its pages were used to wrap a mummy in Ptolemaic Egypt. Even this text is incomplete, and what we have of it isn't fully translatable. What I want most for this language, and others in its endangered situation, is to discover more examples of it which can thereafter be examined and compared with other surrounding languages. I want us to understand where it comes from. For the love of dogs, I want to someday see a television series where its reconstruction is the lingua franca, just as one may already consume Apocalypto in Mayan. I want books written on Etruscan linguistics and culture, and I want novels set in the time period. I want to break the stranglehold Rome and Greece have on the imagination of historical novelists. I just want more Etruscan.